Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation podcast, where we discuss the exciting innovations that lie ahead for organizational ground transportation. Each episode, we cover topics tailored to those resolving transportation-related challenges and provide tips, tools, and trends that will inspire you to stay ahead of the curve. And now, here's your host, Daniel Perez.
Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation. Today we have a veteran in the transportation and an expert in the ground transportation sector, Mr. Matt Daus. How are we doing today, Chief?
I am good, Dan. Thank you. Glad you called me a veteran and not a dinosaur.
Thank you. And I say it with a lot of respect and admiration. So, Matt, you have an extensive bio. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, and a little bit about your firm, so that way we could sort of give a little bit of context to all the listeners.
Sure, Dan, and thanks for having me on. I know a lot of your other folks that came on the podcast, and you had really a great series, so I'm honored to be here. My life story is a long one. I had no interest in transportation growing up, other than playing with some trains and my big wheel. I'm actually a musician, as you can see. I wanted to do that professionally. I was classically trained on piano, taught myself how to play guitar like Eddie Van Halen in high school. And my parents gave me an ultimatum. They basically said, look, you want to be a musician? You can't live here if you're homeless and not making any money. And I said, oh, okay. They said, go find something else to do, which I did. And then, basically do the music on the side, which is what I did. So I went to law school looking to be an entertainment lawyer because, medicine or these other professions weren't for me. I didn't even think about business, but it probably was a mistake. I probably should have went to business school because I ended up being pretty darn good at marketing, at the end of the day. I think there's a lot of relationships between PR people and lawyers, more than you think. They both spin everything, right? So, I went to law school, came out, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to do entertainment law when I got out because I realized that an entertainment lawyer is not doing these fancy copyright infringement cases. They're agents and they're signing talent. Then as a musician, I hated that. So I ended up doing medical malpractice for a few years. Absolutely hated it. And I got involved in politics and I pivoted to the city. And I took a role as a human rights commissioner. I decided to go into employment law and become an employment discrimination attorney. First, I was representing the people discriminating against. My goal was to go to work for a big firm and leave and, represent management and businesses to defend against the claims. And this was around the time when the Anita Hill hearings happened and they amended the 91 Civil Rights Act to make it easier to sue. So the whole industry was exploding. It was very interesting to me. And I felt like I was doing something positive for society. And then that was pretty much the beginning of a long career in government that I didn't anticipate. I was looking to go to government to get in and get out and get some experience. And I ended up getting promoted to several positions. I was general counsel of several agencies, including the Community Development Agency, which gives out, anti-poverty money to nonprofits. There I met Diane McKechnie, who became the taxi commissioner. So I ended up getting involved in transportation because I liked working for Diane. She was a great commissioner. And then when she went to TLC, she asked me to join her. And I had a couple of pit stops before I went to her. I was, also for a brief period of time at the Trade Waste Commission, which was interesting because I was working on behalf of the mayor trying to get the mafia out of the private sanitation industry. And so that was a dangerous job. I was soon done with it because a lot of the lawsuits prevented us from taking the licenses away from people that we knew were dirty, but we didn't have anything on them. So I ended up with Diane and I was in charge of her, the court system at TLC. For those of you who know TLC, the court system was a real disaster in the late 90s. There were floods. My first day on the job, I walked out of the elevator and there was water streaming down and there were fist fights breaking out. We cleaned up the tribunal and made it more professional. I oversaw all the administrative law judges that hear the cases involving the taxi commission. And then, in 98, when the mayor won re-election, I became general counsel. We reformed all the laws top to bottom at TLC, applied them equally to every industry, black car, limo, taxis. Whenever we looked at rules, there was always a disparity. If we're going to do drug testing, it needs to be done for everybody the same exact way. Driver is a driver. So that was our philosophy. And after winning all the lawsuits and reforming the laws top to bottom with the point system and defensive driving and all that jazz, what ended up happening is I got promoted right before 9/11 when my boss retired, and Bloomberg reappointed me, and I still am the longest serving commissioner, chair, and CEO of the agency. The TLC is the leading regulator in the world for regulating paratransit, NEMT, limos, black cars, and now Uber. I got out before all the Uber stuff happened. Believe it or not, I've had 3 hats since then that I've been wearing still to the same day. I'm transportation technology chair, formerly distinguished lecturer at CUNY. So I've been teaching transportation technology, sustainability for over 10 years. I'm president still since 2009 of the Regulators Association, the International Association of Transportation Regulators. So all the taxi and the TNC commissioners, we meet every year and we work on best practices. And last but not least, the hat by which you originally know me is I founded a very unique and special niche transportation law practice at the law firm of Windows Marks 12 years ago. I came in, founded it. I'm partner at the law firm. And it started out representing taxi and limo companies. Now it represents anything that moves anything. We have a multimodal practice, anything from flying taxi companies to driverless cars to bikes to software companies to the traditional taxis and limos. And we even do work for governments. We do consulting, business strategy, and law. And it's a multifaceted law firm. We do everything. We do labor cases. We do licensing, regulation, legislation review, government contracting. If you get sued, no matter what it is, we will represent you. We even have a white-collar criminal defense practice. So it's a full-service firm. It's been around since the 1800s. We have a lot of prominent partners. My entire group, we have about 30 lawyers that do nothing but transportation, and there really is no firm like it in the country in terms of what we do. We have a lot of former commissioners and judges and former government servants. My partner, Tony Kosha, is the chairman of Amtrak. He used to run the Port Authority. So from the infrastructure to rail to airports, and what I handle is everything on the ground, whether it's a package delivery company, a bus, a motor coach company, and what's interesting about the practice is that it has no limits. We don't do the same thing every day. We have so many different things that we do, and the firm has a long history. We are one of the oldest law firms in the country. We've been around since the 1800s. Our first client was Thomas Edison. We have about 300 staff, 150 lawyers. And so we're a nice size. We're not too big. Our rates are flexible, and it's been a lot of fun because, I kind of came out into private sector right when this Uber thing was starting, and, everything, this pot was stirred, and now look at all the crazy stuff that we have now, all these different apps and different technology solutions. It all was kind of created by that one disruption, act. And I was on the other side. Travis Kalanick desperately pursued me, the founding CEO, to represent him. And I thought there was something off with the company at the time. I was like, I don't want anything to do with this guy. I ended up deciding, I said, you know what? I have all these regulators. I'm a regulator, plus the industry I felt was being unfairly treated. I'm building a practice. I said, I'm going to go on the other side. So I was like public enemy number one for Uber and Lyft from the beginning. And now things have changed. I'm talking to them and, not that cozy with them, but we actually collaborate more because they're mainstream now. So that's kind of the history of my life. Still play music, still try to have a good time. But what we do every day is exciting, man. I love it. And I never thought I'd be into transportation, but it's really building big things and looking at things from a 10,000 foot level. And really what lawyers tend to forget, it's not about making money. It's about helping people, so we treat every client the same, whether they're a pro bono client that we're doing for free, like a limo association, we represent at least 5 or 6 of them around the country, or, a small startup or a big multinational company. You get the same attention. We'll go to the wall for you. And it's something that we're very passionate about. And I'm very fortunate to have had my career evolve to where it is now.
Awesome. Thank you for the extensive bio and for being in our show today. So Matt, tell us a little bit about, I have to ask you, when, back then, if you were to go back and reflect on the, when you first started, especially in TLC, and when you mentioned about the mafia sort of being involved in the sector, Tell us a little bit about it. For folks that are just getting started or probably veterans in the sector to sort of memorize how those times were and how you guys were able to conquer those obstacles.
Well, it was a different time, and I guess maybe the best way to sum it up, Dan, is to talk about people being interested not just in being lawyers, but joining the government. Like a lot of people in the industry never went to the government before, right? And they kind of look at the government like it's this scary creature. We don't understand them. I speak their language. It took me a long time to figure out how they operate, but it's, the motivations in government are, people don't like to take responsibility. And I think that's, for people that are looking for careers in government, I think it's great to get young and energetic people that want to make a difference. Like I feel like my time in government, I left as a civil service commissioner and TLC commissioner. I feel like I saved lives. I did good. I got out, but by the grace of God, nothing happened to me. Sometimes you could be a really good person, work hard, and the bigger you get in government, the more people try to hurt you and tear you down, whether it's the media or people that, you don't even know where it's coming from. People might see you on TV who work at City Hall, and they may say, I don't like that guy. He looks too good. He's making the mayor look bad because he gave a better press. This is the type of personal stuff that doesn't necessarily happen in business, whether it's narcotics traffickers or people who are in at the top of their game, Bezos and Twitter and those guys and Elon Musk. They can be enemies one day, and if they can make money together, they're best friends. So they stab each other in the back for a purpose. Whereas in government, you never know where it's coming from. But I don't want to discourage people. If we let the people go to government that are lazy or not motivated and don't care, you're going to get even worse results. So I want people when they can afford to do it like I did before you have a family and you have to support kids, that you actually get it out of the way early and make a difference. That's what a lot of people do. They go to work for congressmen and stuff like that. So, people in government are also misunderstood. Like half the time, private industry in the transportation sector especially just don't understand how they're thinking. I know how they think. And the way, and we understand the rules. We know what their last step is, their current step, and the next step is going to be. It's like a playbook. It's like playing chess, and their primary motivation is not to hurt people. It's usually to cover themselves and not lose their jobs. Yeah. And people like to think that there are conspiracies in government. Sometimes there are. Usually there's not. It's just a bunch of people and it's rare to have somebody stand up there and say, you know what, I'm responsible for something. And if I screw up, I'm going to take the heat for it. Totally. And I think that's the biggest lesson learned after 20 years in government. I would never go back. People say never. I kind of say never. I'm very happy being on the outside now. But I got to tell you, it's not a bad thing. And we need good people to go there. We don't want people to be scared of it. They need to reform it, and they need to treat it like the private sector. And I still hire people, like I said, Dan, from the government. I find the diamonds in the rough and I bring them into the practice because they speak the language too. So we're doing a disservice to our people if we don't have some people on my staff that still have those fresh connections with the government, but still understand how it works and the people on the other side respect us because they know that we were there too.
Totally. Thank you, Matt. So let's fast forward from the 90s to as of today. What is the main challenges that you see sort of on a high level on the ground transportation sector, Matt? Whether it's from a regulatory perspective, let's start from a regulatory perspective. Mm-hmm. What comes to mind?
Well, I think the biggest challenge we have right now, Dan, is that the regulations are a mess. They were a mess from the beginning. Now they're even worse that Uber and Lyft created these TNC laws, So where can I start? The history of regulation is who was here first and who came here second and third, right? New York City is a perfect example. We had the taxi cabs. They were picking up street hails and they were taking radio calls. Mayor Koch at the time saw that people were not being taken to certain areas of the city because of how they looked or because of the economics, and they pulled the radios out. And there was a deal that was cut where, the black car industry was created by a bunch of yellow medallion owners that tried to recreate that in a franchise or co-op system, a corporate transportation with a black car. So they carved out their turf. And the same thing in Nashville, in Arkansas, anywhere that you go, the industries as they evolved luxury transportation, livery, which is somewhere in between, and taxis, and livery being the retail. When they have lobbyists, they try to carve out turf for themselves, and that's the history of transportation. That who is here first? How do we protect what we have? Who's coming? How do we create a cocoon around them? And then at the end of the day, after 50 years, you have a mess on your hands. And Uber and Lyft are a perfect example. They couldn't get what they wanted at the city level because the regulators were fighting with them. So I said, okay, we got 250 million. Let's go over their heads and get state laws passed. And the state laws even, are in some ways are anti-competitive, because even if you have an app and you want to become a TNC, the insurance costs so much and the licensing fees cost so much. And the definition of a TNC says you could be a taxi or a limo using an app, but you can't take advantage of the lesser regulation that's there, because the definition says, except this shall not apply to taxis and limousines. It actually says that in every state law. So the law is a mess. So what we're trying to do about it, IETR has a modernization project. We're looking to modernize the regulations. You know how you walk into an elevator and it says like the building is being modernized, please bear with us, as we undergo construction. We're getting the best private sector and regulatory minds from all over the world to trade notes on what works and what doesn't work. And we're going to try to streamline and get rid of unnecessary regulations. And these are going to be recommendations that the nonprofit government group that we have is going to give to everyone around the world, including the industry. We want industry input on it too. We need to fix this disparity between the state TNC regs and the local taxi and sometimes local limousine and black car regs. It's all over the map, and we need to kind of fix it, especially since Uber now is partnering with taxis. There's all these legal roadblocks and laws that will need to be fixed if this partnership works, because the laws at the state level were not designed to be at the local level. So that's kind of like, I think, the big thing that's going on in our industry. And also the non-emergency medical transportation industry is being disrupted in an incredible way. Not just the public paratransit ADA service, but the non-emergency private service that's subsidized by Medicaid. That industry is booming, but the one problem that we have in every industry is not just the high cost of insurance, as you know, and the regulatory framework and the governance model. There's not one boss in charge of transportation in any state. There's multiple agencies that you have to deal with, right? That's a big problem. But the driver shortage is real. It started before the pandemic, when the federal government started paying money to people to stay home. That was 10, 15,000 more than what they were making on the job, especially school bus drivers. They decided to leave the industry. So the trucking industry started with the driver shortage. Now it's in every one of our industries, bus, motor coach, limo, taxi, and it's a real problem. So those are the big issues that we're facing. And, those are the biggest threats that we have right now.
Totally. Thank you, Matt. What sort of innovations are you excited about in the transportation sector? You mentioned all of the challenges, but being more optimistic, because I'm a huge believer that yes, there's a ton of challenges, but there's also so much upside that is happening, and there's so many opportunities for the bright minds that are willing to embrace all these challenges. Because even today, I was talking to one of our Fortune 1000 customer, and I was sort of sharing with him the challenge that we have serving his account, because number one, we have the shortage issue. Number two, we have this inflation that we haven't sort of put contract increased clauses that we haven't been able to keep up with the cost. So we're pretty much taking a hit on the profit margin, right? Mm-hmm. So to sort of switch subjects a little bit, what is sort of all the ritual effect that is coming to you on the legal side by seeing all the sort of challenges that are happening in the industry? Are you guys seeing more companies going out of business? Are you seeing more opportunities sort of coming in to your firm with this similar challenges? What are you seeing?
Well, in my firm, we see everything. Like I said, we represent anything that moves. So we represent, like I said, flying taxi companies, automated vehicle companies, mobility as a service companies, software companies. We're seeing like the cutting edge new folks coming in, EV charging companies, and we're also representing the incumbent industries. So I would, if I had to sum it up, Dan, and it's a good question, I would say that, what we're seeing is business is off the charts. And part of it's because of, how we market ourselves. During the COVID pandemic, there was nobody really leading. And people were just didn't know what to do the first couple of months. So I held a webinar, I invited all the industry leaders and the regulators, and then I started a newsletter, and the newsletter became very popular. My staff was asking me when we're going to stop it. I said, well, we can. Everybody is dependent on it. But business is off the charts, and I don't see any slowdown anyway. And I think a lot of this is because companies that were inefficient and bloated, they right-sized themselves in order to qualify for the COVID relief. So when they were forced to kind of figure out who stays and who goes because of reduced business, and also to clean up their books to qualify for the business loans and for the PPP, that created a situation which thankfully, as business came back, business travel isn't where it is in the limo industry, but they're able to at least handle it. They can handle what they have, and they want to have more vehicles and more drivers. But, some of these companies may have gone under if they didn't right size. So it was a blessing in disguise for belt tightening purposes. We saw a lot of M&A. We do merger and acquisition work at our firm, a lot of it. So we either represent the buyer, the seller, or sometimes we'll represent, one or other sides or both to do the due diligence, looking at the permits and stuff like that. So the M&A activity was hot last year and the year before. It's kind of slowed down a little bit. Right now, what I'm seeing a lot of is software platforms, automated enforcement. We do a lot of work for big companies and small companies to tap into the billions of dollars in infrastructure money that was made available for EV charging stations. We have companies that are building different business lines. They're getting out of just doing transportation and using their real property to put chargers that are paid for in part by the government and going to charge other people in the industry and outside the industry to charge. So they're opening up different business lines now. So those are, I think, the big trends that I'm seeing. Everybody's got new software platforms and new angles, and there's no shortage of new startups coming in. Not the level that we had years ago, but it's off the charts. And one thing I think might be worth pointing out is that it's funny because we've been through a lot with this pandemic, and everyone's concerned about a recession coming, but I haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen it. We're knock on wood. Hopefully it won't happen. In this industry, it has not been happening, and the industry is coming back strong in a lot of different ways, even despite the challenges that we have. And I'm excited about the new technologies. To answer the first part of the question, what am I excited about? Flying taxis. Yeah, it's happening. It's going to happen. It's we're still crowded on the street. It's in time. We will be using them for emergency services. I think we'll be using them for airport trips, especially when they finalize and get approval from the FAA for the quiet vehicles. Right now, they're using helicopters like Blade in New York City. Once it gets to a vertical, what we call a VTOL, a vertical takeoff and landing that's silent or close to noise free, we're going to see this thing take off. Driverless cars, they're here. They're picking up passengers as we speak. Robo-taxis. For a while, it was unclear what their business model would be, whether people were just going to buy their own driverless cars. The companies that control this, and the leading ones being, Waymo and Cruise, GM, Tesla, and May Mobility, and a few others. There's either a shuttle model where they have autonomous shuttles that they're operating almost like minibuses or microtransit, and then there's the robo-taxi model, which is we want to Uberize the driverless experience. That's the direction that many of these companies are going. And if you go to Phoenix, where we're going for our conference this year, you get out of the airport, you can download the Waymo app, and you're in a driverless car. I encourage everybody to YouTube it. There's plenty of YouTube videos, and I took a driverless car experience the other day at the Commotion conference in Miami. The technology works. The problem is that they're in cities and states where there's very little regulation. In New York, Chicago, and other parts of the world, it's going to be a heavier lift to displace the driver workforce and deal with the socioeconomic issues like accessibility and so forth. They're all sustainable. They're all moving in the direction of electric vehicles. But I think those are the issues that we're going to grapple with in addition to the safety issue. And I think the next 3 to 5 years will determine whether these models fail or work. The companies are now doubling down on the robotaxi model. They need to scale it. And yeah, it makes sense in Disney and retirement communities. That's a no-brainer. But where the real money is for them to be profitable is to go into the middle of Manhattan and go into the big cities and scale like Uber did. And the last thing I'd mention is mobility as a service, which I'm a big fan of. It's in Helsinki, Finland. It's in Vienna, Austria. We're doing some pilots in the US. The concept is to load your credit card on your phone, take that phone and take a bike and walk to public transit, take a bus, get out of the bus and take a black car or a livery or a limo or an Uber to your last mile. It's the whole concept of seamless payment on one platform with multiple modes. I think that's the future. And public transit agencies like the MTA and others, I really think they should be spending a lot of the money that they're taking from our passengers on our industry to have us solve the problem as part of an ecosystem in the transportation deserts that we have in our cities. When you go into a suburban environment now, public transit agencies, they always want to build more buses and more rail that is most of the time not used. The answer is to have minivans or shuttles, what we call microtransit, and first and last mile services done by black cars and taxis in underprivileged neighborhoods that can't afford to pay $15 to $20 to go 3 miles from their home to the train station using an Uber. So I think those are the 3 things I would keep an eye on. I think they're real. They can go in a lot of different directions. And the last thing I'll mention is telematics. The use of black boxes and in vehicles has been something the industry could have benefited from for years. But because of the independent contractor model, fleets are scared, whether it's a bus fleet or a taxi fleet or a black car fleet, to tell their drivers, unless they actually own the vehicles and employ them, which is a smaller part of the industry, they're concerned about getting a labor lawsuit. We have to defend these work classification cases all the time. We don't never represent the drivers. We always represent the mobility companies. And it's becoming more and more difficult to defend them. The DOL laws that are being proposed at the federal level take the one important thing that we've hung our hat on as lawyers and expert witnesses in these cases, and that's that the driver that owns the vehicle, that is a major criteria that the courts should be looking at. They're looking to get rid of that, saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter if the driver owns the vehicle." If you're relying on transportation business and that's what you're doing, and you're getting a substantial amount of money from the company that you're working for, the laws of independent contract are being broken down, and a lot of blue states and blue cities and the federal government are trying to force transportation and mobility companies to treat their drivers like employees, right? So this is a big issue. And telematics saves lives. It reduces insurance claims by 50 to 60%. You get insurance discounts. It's great overall, but the movement has not really gotten a lot of steam because the industry is based on independent contractor model. And if you solve that problem, you're creating another problem. The good news is that, this industry is back and they're looking to market their products in a different way, especially through the rental industry. The rental industry is very heavily involved now, like Avis and Hertz and others, right, or third party. If you have a separate entity that's doing it, not your company, it's safer legally. So those are, I think, the big issues that excite me, among other things. So I think those are the things I would keep an eye on the technology side.
Got it. And Matt, switching a little bit of the subjects, we talked a little bit about flying vehicles. When it comes into flying vehicles, how can companies sort of enter into the marketplace where I'm assuming that we don't have all these laws yet, right? Like, so from a legal perspective, from a regulatory perspective, how can they sort of penetrate into the market and knowing if they're in line or out of line with all these different regulations?
Well, there are some champions in Congress, Senator Sinema and others, and the DOT is very much into moving this forward. If you talk to the Technology Innovation Office, they want to do pilot programs and experiment with these services. Dubai is doing it operationally now as we speak. There are some helicopter companies doing service, but I think the thing that's holding it back right now is we don't have approval for an eVTOL, quiet vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. Once we get that, I think things will open up, because right now the big problem that we have is that, if you want to keep these conveyances on, where helicopters usually are, on the water or outside the central business district, it's great. You can get to the airport in 3 minutes if you take a Blade, 3 to 5 minutes. It's 45 minutes, though, in crosstown traffic to take an Uber to get to the heliport. Well, until we start putting them on the top of buildings, which I think will happen one day, we need to make sure that the safety use case is there and people get adapted to it. I actually do not believe that we should go directly to automation. I think there's a lot of talk about doing, drive pilotless, flying taxis. I think it's really important that we have pilots in them from, a psychological standpoint at the beginning of the movement. And there's a lot that goes into it. Like if there's a crash landing, that computer system really has to have in spur of a moment in an urban environment, all of the scenarios of how they could minimize impact and loss of life. Is that soccer field where the kids are playing the best place to land, or should I land on a highway? So there's a lot. I think the use cases, emergency medical transport, organ transplant, and also not just sightseeing, but going to and from the airports to start. And I think once we get those types of vehicles in here, the big entity that's holding this up really is the Federal Aviation Administration. So the FAA, has to approve these vehicles, and that's what's going to take the time. They want to make sure that it's safe. They want to make sure that there are specifications and regulations in place. There already are to some extent, but to get to the point where they're going to start funding these projects, even though the funding's there, I don't see it happening right now. What I see happening is funding being used to build heliports at airports that can be easily converted into a vertiport, with the infrastructure, so that these new vehicles can take off. But it's coming, and because like in a place like California, people will pay for that service to get out of their car, or to get above traffic, and there will obviously be a high-end consumer. But from an equity standpoint, it's all about equity these days. How does the poor person or the person in a transportation desert that can't afford all these trips, how can they benefit from this too? So that's going to be, I think, one of the biggest obstacles too, is figuring out, how this does not become another service for the rich and the elite.
Totally, and I totally agree, because even right now, I'm becoming a helicopter pilot, and I live in Boston, and there's no helipads in the Boston area.
You're a pilot?
I'm just becoming a helicopter pilot right now.
Congrats.
I only have, I'm halfway there, so I'm halfway there. And so my main objective is, my children live in Connecticut. I want to be able to commute back and forth, right, on a faster commute. So the issue is there's no helipads in Boston. So if there's no helipads in Boston, and the government is so restricted about having sort of like satellite helipad locations where people could just land at any given moment, right? So that way we could commute from Boston to New York within an hour and not 4 or 5 hours. Is it they're going to take us 5 years, 10 years to create that awareness? And, where do you see like the time frame between flying vehicles and autonomous vehicles?
I think it's a good possibility. It really depends on the automated vehicle companies for the driverless cars. If they have to figure out a way to address the needs of the cities and the regulators, meaning they need to have an accessible vehicle. They need to find a way to take care of the drivers and not just, send them out to pasture. In the past, elevator operators, others, there was never like a safety net, but in this society, with a lot of the progressive politicians, people want to take care of the drivers. That's the one thing that's a constant. There's a lot of sympathy for the drivers wherever you go. And that issue, along with the unions that have been trying to unionize them for years, are fighting the legislation right now, the Teamsters Union. So those solutions are tough solutions to come up with, but unless we come up with them, the technology's working, it's safe, but you're not going to be able to scale it. So the jury's out on how quickly that could scale, whether this movement goes in a different direction or dies. The flying taxi movement, once we have the vehicle, this thing could take off even faster than the driverless cars if they play their cards right. And I was a skeptic at first, until I started hanging out with some of the companies. We're holding a big conference with the Transportation Research Board in July on this topic. The more I learned about it, and as I started getting involved with the legal issues as well, I realized that this thing could work. They need to just make sure that they get the money and the approvals to pick up and land at certain areas. Once they get those rights of way, it could very well take off, literally, and we've heard of helicopter moms. It's good to see that you're a helicopter dad. You don't see so many of them, right? But you're bringing new meaning to it, Dan. So I can't wait to get your license. I want to take one of the first rides.
Let's do it. And Matt, what is the sort of switching subject here? What is the best business advice or personal advice that you have gotten so far in your extensive career?
It was actually advice about being a lawyer. When lawyers start out, they're like very idealistic. They're very by the book, as they should be, right? But they're not practical sometimes, and they end up killing ideas and killing deals. And I was kind of one of them. I was early on in my career. I was a human rights prosecutor, and I started working for the commissioner directly in the community development agency. And I'll never forget, one day she wanted to make a decision on something, and I can't get into it for attorney-client confidentiality, but I could say to you that it wasn't what she wanted to hear. I had all these 10 excuses why it couldn't work. Chief of staff comes to visit me one-on-one in my office and he's like, dude, you want to continue working here? I'm like, of course. Your head's on backwards. You got to understand what this commissioner wants is to go from point A to point B. And she told me at face-to-face what she wanted. Point A to point B, unless you find a legal path to get there. There's obviously sometimes risks. There's uncertainties. You advise her what those risks are. But I want to know, to get from point A to point B, can I do it? Yes or no? And if it's unethical or illegal, tell me, and I won't do it. But if there's a path, figure it out and advise me what's the risk of being sued. So I lived, and if you look at the code of ethics for lawyers, you're supposed to zealously represent your client. And it's very consistent with the ethics laws. And government attorneys and some attorneys in general, they get so stuck in the weeds that they substitute their judgment for the client. And that's not our job. Our job is to give you the options if we're asked. Our job is to get you where you need to go. Our job is not to run your company. And government lawyers are the worst because, like district attorneys, they will tell you that I don't represent you. You're the commissioner of the agency. I wanted to settle a case. The corporation, the head attorney for the city who works for the mayor told me, we don't have to do whatever you want. You're not our client. We represent the public interest, just like the district attorney doesn't represent the crime victim. But sometimes they take it too far. Sometimes the lawyers craft their legal advice based upon what they think is a result that they like. And that is unethical in my view. It's wrong. So it was very easy for me to go over to the private sector because that's the type of mentality that my clients like, is, to figure out a path. And also when you go to the wall for somebody, you go to the wall for them. You defend them like it's your last dying breath, that you're going to do everything you can. But you also need to know, as Kenny Rogers would say, when to fold them. You need to be able to say, hey, we fought the good fight, but now we need to settle. And you need to give people options, but they're people, they're not widgets. And I think what attorneys don't understand is that the bedside matter, and you heard the phrase that you start to look like your dog after a while. Like, I start to look like my clients, but I attacked. I know how to deal with the high demanding client that screams and yells. I know how to deal with the environmental tree hugging client that wants to change the world. What I try to tell my law partners too, well before COVID happened and we started changing differently, I said, I have a bunch of like rich guys that are in a startup in my office with sneakers and t-shirts, and I'm going to come in there wearing a tie and a suit and looking like I'm from the 17th century. I said, you got to dress like them. You have to play to the crowd. And so when I have a banking client, I'm wearing my suit and my tie. When I'm with a startup, I'm wearing my jeans and my jacket. There's limits to everything, but it's how you dress, how you talk. It's understanding them and trying to get to the bottom of what they're accomplishing. It's an art form. And that is what I really like about practicing law. And I don't think enough lawyers do it that way. I think there's a lot of frustration, not just with billing. We're an alternative billing firm. So, we have flat fees. I write off a lot of time. I just want to help people. So if they're having a hard time, we're always like, trying to do the right thing by them. And we reduce our rates, and we compete at both ends of the spectrum. We're like half the price of the big firms, but we're able to meet, what the street corner attorney would charge if we can. So it's been a good experience. What we've built is really special and it's unique. And as long as I'm standing and able to do it, we're going to keep helping the industry and keep growing and trying to do our best for them. That's the most meaningful part of the job. It's getting them a result, and if not, having them say, you know what, Matt, you guys tried, you were in my corner, you went to the wall for me. I appreciate that. And that's what it's all about. And I think if you look at it from that standpoint, the practice of law shouldn't be such an ugly thing that people make fun of all the time. We need to restore some dignity and some business sense to the industry. We need to be disrupted. We have not innovated in the practice of law for centuries. So we're trying to do it because our clients are innovative in the transportation sector. So yeah, that's what excites me.
Very, very well said. Very well said. And Matt, what are 2 or 1 business books or personal books that you recommend for the listeners?
Well, I could probably recommend all these books that are written by like business people or, my former boss, Bloomberg. They're all great books. But as somebody who was in government and the private sector and transportation, 2 books I would recommend. The first one is The Power Broker, which is it's a big book by Robert Caro. And that's the story of Robert Moses, who for many, many years, a lot of people idolized him as he built New York City. He was the master builder. And now people are demonizing him because, they're complaining that, and it's true, that he divided communities. And there was a lot of racism in the decisions, keeping white and Caucasian communities here and building the Cross Bronx Expressway to keep people of color away from those neighborhoods. Politicians were really, really bad and did some really discriminatory things back there. And he was a product of that era, right? And this is part of what he did, but he also didn't plan properly. So there's a lot of lessons learned on how to not manage a city from a transportation and infrastructure. It's a long book, but if you can get through it, not only will you understand how to better plan for the city of the future, 20, 30, 50 years from now, but more importantly, you'll learn how politics works. And the second book, which goes hand in hand with that, is one of my favorites, Machiavelli's Prince, which is probably the same blueprint that they use in The Godfather. Machiavelli really nailed government, politics, business, and explained what humanity is all about. You hold your friends close, but your enemies closer. These are things that we all can see from the movie The Godfather. But if you apply those principles to government and business, you're always gonna be maybe cautious, a little paranoid, but you're gonna be able to see where the next chess move is coming from and to prepare for it. You don't want to not talk to your competitors. The worst thing you could do is sit in a box and in your ivory tower. The best thing to do is to face your competitors in the industry, go to the industry conferences. You never know. They might buy you out one day. You might buy them out. You may learn something from them, and I think a lot of people in the business sector operate that way. But in government, if you're going to live a day in government, in transportation, read The Power Broker. In general, if you go to work for government, read The Prince and live by those lessons and keep them in the back of your mind. Another great saying from The Prince, and this goes for a lot of people in politics. If you're gonna try to be the king and get rid of the king, you better kill the king. If you're gonna take someone out, whether it's politically or business wise, you better make sure you take them out, because they're gonna come back, or their kids, or their business associates, or fellows. And these are like common sense things, but it defines the essence of human nature. No matter how we evolve, the jealousy, the competitiveness, that's what human is. So you need to figure out a way to rise above it and be realistic about it and work within the system. Otherwise, you won't be successful in business or government. And those are 2 books I'd recommend. Probably not the run-of-the-mill books people suggest. I would also suggest Paul Comfort's cookbook. It's a I know you had him on the show. It's an excellent cookbook. We may be doing one with the taxi regulations, and we'll stay.
Totally done. Very well said. Hey, Matt, I wanted again to thank you for sharing so many nuggets of wisdom and experience in this episode. It's definitely been one of our best episodes with so much wisdom share. How can all the listeners learn more about your firm, get in touch with you? What is the best way to follow you and stay in touch?
Well, probably the best way to get me is on LinkedIn. So Matthew Daus, or you can get me at mdaus@windelsmarks.com. My number is 646-261-1590. Yeah, if you just Google Windels Marks, you'll find me, or I'm on LinkedIn. And of course, they can call you, Daniel, and you can help track me down.
Sounds good. We will make sure to add the contact information on the notes. So with that being said, Matt, again, thank you for being part of our episode today. Thank you for all the listeners. Make sure you like and subscribe and stay tuned for our next episodes coming up. Matt, have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Thanks for tuning in to the future of ground transportation. We appreciate you coming along for the ride. If you found value in this episode and want to hear more, please make sure to subscribe to the show.